So today we're going to learn to look at a paragraph and then answer a question according to what the exercise is asking you to do. So the first thing we're going to do is actually read the paragraph before we start annotating, just to kind of take a look at what the text is expecting and what the question is expecting from you. So the paragraph goes, "Oh God, see how the heathen Tartar races, pouring together from all sides, suddenly fell on the city of Kaffa and attacked the trapped Christians there for almost 3 years. There, blocked in by an immense army, they could hardly breathe, although food could be shipped in, which offered them some hope. But look, the whole army was affected by a disease which overran the Tartars and killed thousands upon thousands every day. It was as though arrows were raining down from heaven to strike and crush the Tartars' arrogance. All medical advice and attention was useless. The Tartars died as soon as the signs of disease appeared on their bodies, swellings in the armpit or groin caused by bruises, followed by a bad fever." And then the question that it asks you is, where do you see the author's perspective and bias? Like, what is the author's opinion really about what they're talking about? And the hint is he seems to favor one group over one group of people over the other. So let's talk a little bit about how to answer this question. So now that I've read the paragraph once, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go do some annotations. Annotations are important to help us think about a text deeper and also to help us interact with the text and ask questions of the text that will help us answer the questions. So the first thing that I did was I highlighted heathens and Tartar just because I don't know what those words mean. And then, of course, the city of Kaffa, maybe I needed to know the geography of it. That would also tell me something about the author. Then I noticed also that the author talks about Christian people as being almost kind of like not being able to breathe. They're incarcerated, and so he's kind of feeling sorry for them. So that's giving me some kind of an indication that he might be maybe Christian as well, if he can feel their pain that way. And then I noticed that the author did a really good job at showing, not telling. When he writes, "It was as though arrows were raining down from heaven to strike and crush the Tartars' arrogance." And he talks about the Tartars being arrogant. That's my next thought. Why is he calling them arrogant? Obviously, this is not a positive thing. So I'm already getting an idea about the author's bias and opinion. So then, as I continue to go down the paragraph, I noticed that the author talks about the Tartars dying from the plague, and how he doesn't really feel bad about that. So I did that with a blue pen just because that's my first kind of analysis of the text. But then to actually start asking the question, to actually start answering the question, I changed the color of my pen. And then I go with red, and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to intentionally try to find the answer. And that is when I really find the answer. I realize that the author isn't really a fan of the Tartars. It's actually very not happy, but maybe doesn't really feel bad about the Tartars dying from the plague. And when he mentions the arrows, like the disease coming down like arrows from the heavens, it also makes me think like they were punished by God. So the conclusion is that yes, the author definitely favors Christians, and then that's where I can see the evidence of the bias. And so I point that out with my red pen to answer the question, because whenever we are answering a question about a text, we always need to find text evidence for it. And the text evidence are those sentences where I know that the author is feeling more sympathetic towards the Christians, and kind of like saying, the Tartars deserve to die from the plague because of what they did to the Christians. So we're going to follow a similar strategy for another paragraph. Again, we're going to read it first before we make any annotations, so we're going to go through it. This one reads, "Thus almost everyone who had been in the east, or in the regions to the south and north, fell victim to sudden death after contracting this horrible disease, as if struck by an arrow which raised a tumor on their bodies. The scale of the mortality and the form which it took persuaded those who lived, weeping and crying, that the last judgment had come. During the bitter events of 1346 to 1348, the Chinese, Indians, Persians, Medes, Kurds, Armenians, Cilicians, Georgians, Mesopotamians, Nubians, Ethiopians, Turks, Egyptians, Arabs, Saracens, and Greeks for almost all the East has been affected, began dying. Wow, so my immediate reaction to this is like, whoa, this is really like a dark paragraph, okay? So what is the question? The question is, what is the tone of this paragraph? Just immediate what we felt when we were reading it, right? What emotions is the author trying to describe, and how are people feeling? So here are my annotations on this one. I immediately start pointing out the words that the author is using to describe the sadness and despair being felt at the time, and just the horrible situation everybody's in. The plague was surely a horrible situation. He describes it as sudden death, a horrible disease. He also shows the struck by an arrow visual, because the arrow at the time was like one of the deadliest weapons. Then he also says people who lived were weeping and crying. So even like people who were alive weren't saved from this because they lost their loved ones. He also references the Bible, and he says last judgment had come. Basically, it's like the end of days. So then when I go back and I look at the question and I change my pen to red, right? Because I'm going to answer this question right now. I'm going to find this text evidence. The tone of this paragraph is absolutely, it's a very negative, very heavy, very sad tone. And how do I know this? Like, what are the emotions that the author is trying to convey? All of these words have a negative connotation. There's no happiness here. When he lists all of the nationalities as well, and kind of says, no matter where you came from, you're still not saved from this disease. That just gives it, kind of like solidifies for me that he's just trying to express what a horrible situation everybody's in. And lastly, how are people feeling? People are feeling in despair. I mean, I can tell by all of his word choice, I can tell that the author is clearly saying that this was a situation where people really struggled, lost a lot of their loved ones, and lost a lot of faith in the systems, in the medical systems, and it was just an all-around sad, dire situation. And here is my text evidence to prove that.